Well, hey there, guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're making a small parts router jig. Well, I think there comes a time in every woodworker's career that they need to put a round over on a smaller piece of stock. And there's no real safe way to hold on to that, whether you're freehand routing or whether you're doing it over at the router table. I do have for bigger pieces, ones that are bigger than tiny, I have this, in which case I can hold that smaller part and route it quite safely in either method, freehand or using the fence. But for me, I want something that I can route small pieces, and I'm talking small. So what we're going to do today is we're going to build a compact jig. I don't want it to take up too much space. I am designing this on the fly according to my needs for this project I have coming up. And we're going to see how it comes out. So let's head over to the bench and see what I have in mind for this project. Well, I've been sitting here at my bench for probably 5 minutes, if not more, just trying to figure out what I want to do. I have an idea in my head, and it's not really coming to the forefront. So what I have here is a 1/2 inch thick piece of half decent quality ply, and it's 9 1/4 inches long. I don't even know how wide it is. It's just a scrap that I had up in the rack. This is 3 1/4 wide. So the first thing I want to do is I want to place a center line. So if we're at 9 1/4 inches long, half of that would be 4 5/8. So we're just going to place this mark right here, and we're going to square off this center line. Now, as I said, I do have a jig for holding small parts in the router table, but the parts that I want to route are very small. So I don't want pieces any bigger than 3 inches being routed in this particular jig. So what I need to do is I want a small little cutout for a working area here that is 3 inches wide. So we're going to come out from our center line at 1.5 inches on either side. Just like that. We'll square it off a little bit. And from the edge, I guess we're going to come in, let's say 3/8 of an inch. There we go. So this is our working area. This is where the bit is going to run. So I'm actually going to extend this just a touch more. I'm going to get a circle template and round off these edges to make it a little cleaner. And then we're going to end up cutting that out with the scroll saw, but I don't want to do that yet. What we need are some stop blocks, and the stop blocks are going to slide back and forth here along this area and hold our smaller parts in place. So I think what I want to do is I want to cut a groove. I need to cut a groove at each one of these sides to give our stop blocks somewhere to travel in. I'm not really sure how that's going to be accomplished. I'll get to that, I'm sure. As you can tell, this whole project is kind of, at the moment, it's a fly by the seat of my pants kind of thing. But what I want, as I said, is I'm going to do, let's say, a 5/16 diameter groove. And let's do it in line with this 3/8. So let's extend that 3/8 of an inch line all the way along our project, just like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark out the grooves, and then again, I'm going to drill them and cut them at the scroll saw. They will be internal cuts. I'm going to say they're going to be 5/16 of an inch wide because I'm going to use 1/4 inch jig hardware for this. So let me get all of that cut and I'll show you what it looks like at that point. All right, and we're looking at something like this. Truth be told, I reduced the width of this groove here. I said I was going to go 5/16. 5/16 is a little sloppy. when it comes to using 1/4" hardware, and that's what I want to do. I want to use 1/4" T-bolts. So I've cut some 3/4" thick plywood. It's 7/8 of an inch wide, and the length coincides with exactly half of what our jig is. And I have 2 of them, just like that. These are going to be our clamps that are going to pinch our piece here in the middle. So I have drilled a hole 1/4 of an inch in on each of these, and I have drilled it to coincide with this end of our groove. Now, the reason for that is once we get our T-bolts in and our little jig knobs, just like this, we can adjust this all the way open on both sides to be able to give us the full working area of our 3 inches, or we can bring it in tight as tight can be and pinch that. But the 1/4" in from the edge is to give us this 1/8 of an inch lip. That way, if for some reason we have our clamp a little askew, it's not going to interfere with these edges, because these edges are going to ride on our router table fence. I know it's a little confusing right now, but bear with me, because it's going to make sense soon enough. Well, what we need to do now is we need to make some provisions for our T-bolts. And if we look here on the back, we can see that our T-bolt is going to cause us some issues as it's, of course, raised up. So what I want to do is I want to measure the width, and over at the table saw, we're going to very carefully on the bottom of our jig, we're going to rip a very, very shallow dado just to allow this T-bolt to be recessed into our 1/2 inch ply, but as well to allow it to not turn as we're tightening our jig. So you'll want to make it as wide as what the T-bolt is. Don't go with the width, or with the length rather here, because this will just spin. So let me get that dado cut and I'll show you how that's going to work. Okay, so that little dado was just made with multiple passes, and we're just going to clean this up here with a 1/2 inch chisel, just like this. Doesn't have to be too perfect. And with that little dado cut in there, our T-bolt fits, and you can see it's not going to spin. So we can tighten that down in there. It's actually a little recess from that bottom surface, so it's not going to interfere when it's sitting on our router table. So we'll just clean up this other side and then we can move on. Well, initially what I wanted was to have jig knobs here, but unfortunately, they're even shop-made ones are too wide and they interfere with how the fence is going to interact with this jig. So that's okay. We've got some wing nuts. So essentially the way it's going to work is that these will come in here, clamp down, and you can use the wing nuts to tighten it in. Now, it'll work a little better over at the router table when I show you how to do this. So there we go. That's that part done. But the problem here now is we have it secured this way, but what about this way? And if we try to route this, while it's not going to go anywhere from left to right, that router bit, as soon as it hits it, is going to shoot it back. So we're going to have some problems with that. So we're going to need to place something here in order to hold this in place at the router table. I don't want to hold it this way. I would rather be able to hold it clamping down, and preferably I would like to be able to hold it both if possible, but I'm not sure if that's a thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a small toggle clamp. So for our toggle clamp to hold our piece in place, we need some kind of fence here to hold it to. So I'm going to make a small little miniature fence out of 1/2 inch thick ply, some of this stuff that I have here as the base. And as well, in our base, I have cut that 1/2 inch wide dado. This is going to house another T-bolts so that we can adjust our fence and hold it in place. I'm going to need to cut a groove here the same way that I did with these. I'm just going to do it on the scroll saw, drill a hole, and then join those together at the scroll saw and cut this groove. This is kind of not working out as easily as what I was hoping, but it's coming together. The fence has got me a little perturbed here, but I'm going to make it up and show you what I come up with. I was hoping that the fence would be another layer of protection for my hands, but then I realized I'm starting to get too bulky here. And by adding more protection, it's going to make it so that the jig is too bulky. And plus I have full protection right here, so I really don't need an added layer. So let's get this fence made. I'll show you what I come up with. I'm not going to film the whole thought process because I don't even know what I'm doing at this point as far as the design goes. So I'm going to get this slot done, and then I'm going to kind of judge it from there. Well, I'll just show you the components that I've come up with here for this fence. It's all at a 1/2 inch plywood. We have a small base here. The whole thing is 2.5 inches wide, I believe it is. But I've cut a couple gussets. They will get glued in place here just to keep the whole assembly square and help to support it. We're just going to glue this together. I have a hole drilled at the bottom here, 9/32 in diameter. That is to house our 1/4 inch hardware for our front to back adjustment. And as well, I have cut off center this 3/16 of an inch wide groove top to bottom here, and that will allow our hardware for our toggle clamp. I don't know if you can see that there, but that's going to allow our hardware for our toggle clamp to be able to be adjusted height wise. If we have something that's a little smaller, then we can bring it down to the bottom, something a little taller up to the top. So either way, I'm going to get this fence sanded. I'm going to glue it together. We're going to let it set up. And then we're going to assemble this jig and just see how everything fits together. And I'll show you what it looks like assembled. Well, it's the next day and our glue on our fence is dry. This actually worked out a lot better than what I thought it was going to. It's a little tall, but that allows for taller pieces with the adjustment of the toggle clamp. So how do we assemble this? Well, the first thing I have is a couple of 1.5 inch T-bolts, and each one of these will go into one of these side slots, and then our fence, or our clamp, if you will go on top of that. We then have a 1/4 20 wing nut. There we go, that'll hold that in place. Same thing on the other side. We'll just repeat the process with the 1.5 inch T-bolt and then a 1/4 20 wing nut to hold it in place. Now our fence pretty much holds in place the same way, but before we do that, we want to put our toggle clamp in place. And we can see here, remember I did that offset slot. Well, that was to allow our actual piston of our toggle clamp to be centered here on our jig. So I've got some 1024 thread bolts. They're a little long for what I need. I may cut them down at a later date, but for now they're going to suffice. So I have those. We'll put them through the slot and through the toggle, some number 10 washers, and then a couple of 1024 thread wing nuts, just like this. Now those are kind of in close proximity to each other, but they still work. And that will provide the adjustment up and down. From there we have a 1 inch T-bolt, and that will go through this center slot. This is 1/4 inch thread, 1/4 20. It'll go through our center hole here on our jig. And you know what? I think I'd like a washer on that. So I'm going to get a 1/4 inch washer, place it on there, and then secure it in place with a 1/4 inch wing nut. Anything that's adjustable like this, the washers help to prevent your, say, wing nuts in this case, or jig knobs if you're using them, prevent them from binding. I didn't get them on these clamps here only because the 1/4 inch washers extend so far beyond the actual clamp that it interferes with this front rail here that is supposed to run on our fence of our router table. And that, guys, is our jig. I think it turned out all right. So how do you set this up? Well, let's head over to the router table and I'm going to show you. Well, over here at the router table, the first thing we want to do is we want to set our fence. So I have a 1/8 inch round over here set up in our router table, and we're just going to pull the fence until it's covering where our bit is. And I'm using a straight edge, and you want the bearing to run exactly flush with your fence. So we're just going to use my micro adjust here to change this up. All right, and that there is about right. So the bearing is flush with our fence. You want to make sure that you have as little opening as you can here while still leaving enough room for the bit to spin. We'll just give this a spin here to make sure, you know, that's pretty tight on the right side. So I'm actually going to open my fence split just a tiny bit more. And that should be perfect about there. So you should have a space that looks something like this. Now it's time to set up our jig, and the jig is set completely with the fence. So here we have our stock that we want to route. We're going to place it here on our jig, just like this, and place our jig flat against the fence. If you remember, we have that divot here, that 3-inch wide divot. That's our working area. So we're going to center our piece in that working area and push it so that our jig is against the fence and our block is against the fence. And once we get that set, we're going to bring in our 2 side retainers and we're going to tighten them in place. There we go. And that will keep our piece from moving left to right. Now we want to set our fence at this point. So all we're going to do is push it forward, which is giving forward pressure just a little bit on our block of wood, but it's also going to set kind of a backdrop, basically a seat for this to sit in. And then we will adjust the height of our toggle and we will be able to lock that in place. Now, truth be told, I actually had to modify this handle on the toggle because it was interfering with the fence. So once you get that set and you're happy with it, you need to set the height of the bit. And what you want to do is this edge of the bit right here. This is going to be set so that it is flush with the bottom of the piece that we're routing. So let me just show you how we're going to route this one little block. So we're essentially going to use that center 3-inch wide working area to plunge the bit, to plunge our piece into the fence so that our router is not actually making contact with anything. We will slide it from right to left to route our round over and then remove it from the fence. Once we get that done, we can loosen our toggle clamp. We don't have to make any other adjustments. We can simply flip the little block in this case, flip it over and make another pass and keep going until all of our sides are routed. And there you go. A very small piece, 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch in this case, that you would never ever take to the router table trying to hold it with your hands. It's a good way to lose a finger. But this jig made it so that I am able to place it in here, lock it in very securely, and have full protection of the jig with my hands against the back of the jig and keep it completely away from the router bit. Now, guys, this working area here, if this doesn't suit you, you can change that. You can make it larger, smaller, you can make it deeper if that's what you want. Eventually, I think that these hold downs may get chewed up, but it's a strip of 3/4 plywood. It's a very common source material, and you can very easily change these. I can't see the fence ever getting chewed up because it's in behind the actual work surface. But either way, it's a great little jig. It turned out much better than what I thought it was going to, considering I had absolutely zero plan. It's always a little worrisome trying a brand new jig when it's never been tested. But honestly, this one performed really, really well. And I'm glad I took the extra steps to make it. There you go. A small parts routing jig for your router table. And there you have it. A small parts routing jig. Guys, this turned out way better than I ever anticipated that it would. It has quite a bit of versatility, and although I was only using it to route 1" by 1" cubes, it has a lot more than that, because with these side hold downs, or the side clamping rails, whatever you want to call them, we can go just over 3 inches, and with the adjustable toggle, I think we can do pretty much the same, 2.5 to 3 inches. So versatility really is kind of built into this thing. I'm not sure how far in depth we could go. It looks like about 2.5 inches. But truth be told, this project was made strictly for routing the edges on those 1" cubes. There was a few challenges along the way, a few things that kind of threw me for a loop. And one of them was not being able to use jig knobs. I really wanted jig knobs on the top, but that didn't happen because there's not enough working space there on these clamping supports to be able to house a larger jig knob. Even with the 1/4 wing nuts, if they are faced perpendicular to your router fence, they still interfere. This actually touches the fence. So there was that challenge there to make sure that they were either tightened enough so that they were running parallel to the fence, or tightened just a little less so that they were running parallel to the fence, or so that they didn't interfere. That was one of the challenges there, as well, with those same front rails wanting a washer there. The washer interfered with the fence again as well. Another challenge, the lever on the toggle clamp, I actually had to cut it off and file it smooth to make it, a little more ergonomic for my genteel hands. But I had to cut the end of it off because when it was clamping down and clamped down fully, it prevented our working surface here from getting in tight to the fence. Now, truth be told, after playing with this for a little while, I did say that you want your router bit riding right in line with your fence, like level with the front edge of your fence. And I actually found that it worked much better if you just bring it just a tiny bit proud, the tiniest bit proud, like a 1/64th, like hardly even mentioning. But it just gave me a little more versatility where I wasn't relying on the fence so much. It made it so that I could get the block, the small part, into the bearing, get the routing done, and still have that support of both the bearing, but also have the support of the fence, because the gap that was there between these little working rails and the fence was so minimal that it really didn't make a difference. Either way, guys, I'm very happy with this, how this turned out. It's small, it's easy to store, it protects my hands and fingers, it holds those projects on 4 different sides, left, right, back, and top. So any little small piece that you have in there is fully supported. And honest to goodness, I'm quite pleased with it. It's an excellent jig, and I hope you're going to give it a try for yourself. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you've enjoyed the content. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We've got an amazing audience base here, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of it. Guys, this one was a lot of fun. A little bit of problem solving here and there with the different dados and the hardware issues and et cetera, et cetera. But I enjoy those kind of challenges. So this was right up my alley, and I ended up with a project that worked really well in the end. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's content. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you're going to give this one a try for yourself. I hope that you're going to make these smaller jigs for your shop to keep your fingers for another day and get them further away from the working parts of your tools. And more importantly, guys, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.